Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation to come and speak to you here today. It's better than Paris, where I was last week, where it rained for 3 days, so this is quite a nice opportunity to get a bit of sun. My talk today is essentially about three things: a sustainability challenge, the large-scale users of woody biomass for heat and power generation in EU countries face, the solution that the sector has developed, and then to just discuss and review the progress that has been made so far. So the challenge. The challenge is quite considerable. You know the background as far as EU regulations and programs for decarbonising EU electricity generation are concerned. So the companies that are actually taking this forward in terms of burning woody biomass, it only makes business sense for them to do so if they get the financial incentives offered by the governments in their national countries. But to get those financial payments, they have to demonstrate not only that the material they use is legally sourced, but also sustainably sourced. That all sounds very simple, but of course the definition of sustainability for woody biomass varies between the EU member states. So in some states there is almost nothing. Belgium says it must be sustainable. As you've heard, the UK has very detailed requirements. The Netherlands has some very detailed requirements as well. So it's not an easy matter. So one of the challenges the sector faced is just the tradability of material. If you've got a ship of shipment of pellets, and suddenly there's one of the generators facilities goes down for any reason, you can't divert them to another plant in another company because they have different sustainability requirements in that country. So it makes it all very complicated. Now, I'm a forester and I've been involved in FSC and PFC certification for many years. I chair the UK standard, which is used by both FSC and PFC. And my first reaction is, well, why don't we just use FSC and PFC and see if we can plug the gaps? Because the electricity sector isn't inventing standards because they want to invent standards, it's inventing them because they've got a problem. And the problem is that the forest level schemes have insufficient uptake in some of the key forest source areas. So that's one problem, but the bigger problem is quite simply that at the moment they don't contain all the elements that are required for biomass generators to collect and transport energy and carbon data, greenhouse gas data along the supply chain. So a bridging solution is required, and you've heard a little bit about that already from the last speaker. So the companies that came together to form the SBP are 7 large generating companies. That's their logos. And the vision and objectives that they've set out are really quite clear. And the first thing to say is that SBP is not an advocacy body. It's not a trade association. It's not representing the sector politically in any way. But it has some very prescribed objectives. The first one, which is the most important one at the moment, is to develop a tool, basically, which allows the companies to demonstrate compliance with the European and national regulatory requirements, including sustainability requirements. So that is the number one objective at the moment. Secondary objective is to increase transparency of the supply chain by collecting and disseminating performance data. And this is so that some of the assertions that are often thrown at the sector by, for example, NGOs, often there's not any data or real hard information to back those up. So through the certification process, we'll be collecting a lot of data. If we can aggregate that and publish it, then we hope that can lead to a more informed debate. And thirdly, in the pecking order at the moment, is we're really keen to see greater uptake of the existing forest certification schemes in some of these key wood baskets, the southeast states being the one of particular interest. This has stopped working. Oh, there we go. Really just to say, I don't want to go into the governance, but we're not-for-profit organisations controlled by the members. We work closely with all sorts of groups in putting together the standards, including biomass producers, regulators. We have some important independent elements of our programme, which are an advisory board, which is independent. It had its first meeting in Paris last week, and we have the former Director General of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, IUCN, leading that. We also have an impartial technical committee, again independent, which undertakes a final check on certification body approvals and biomass producer first certification approvals. When it comes to, no, I'm going the wrong way, progress to date, the most important thing we've done is to basically develop the first version of our framework standards. And as I say, these are based on regulatory requirements, and they use a risk-based approach. So they're aligned as closely as possible with FSC and PFC standards and processes, and we're looking to work with these schemes. So right at the outset, we had meetings with both FSC and PFC, and discussed the difficulties that the generating sector had. And a good outcome of that is that PFC has now started work on a greenhouse gas module. So they'll be able to carry, assuming this is successful, they'll be able to collect and carry the data along the supply chain for a PFC certificate holder. And that'll be extremely important. We also discussed that with FSC. Unfortunately, FSC didn't feel able to go forward with that at this stage. We've also offered support for FSC to develop its regional risk assessments around the world, but again, they didn't feel able to take up that offer at this stage. When it comes to increasing uptake of FSC and PFC, NGOs said to us they're very concerned that we were sort of offering a lay-by, if you like, a passing place where they, on the road to certification to FSC and PFC at forest level, and a lot of people would actually use it as an excuse not to go all the way to full FSC or PFC certification. Actually, what we're finding is that in some areas, particularly in Russia, that SBP is becoming a driver for the uptake of forest level certification using FSC. So it may not be what NGOs anticipated, but that's actually what's happening in the field. And we've got a working group established looking at supply chain transparency. We had a first meeting a couple of weeks ago because one of the lessons we've learned from other schemes is the importance of collecting some baseline data so you can actually start to demonstrate what your scheme has achieved. There's something funny with this, but there we go. The geographical scope. What I'm going to talk about mainly is the SBP certification framework. So starting off with the geographical scope, so as far as producers of biomass is concerned, it's open to anyone, anywhere to get certified. So it's a global application to source areas, and it's open access, anyone can do it. It's specifically designed for woody biomass which is being supplied into the European market, which doesn't mean that other markets might not start demanding it, because we've had discussions with the Korean regulators who are interested in the process, for example. It's aligned with the national regulatory requirements to cover those countries in which our members are actually burning woody biomass at the moment, so it's Belgium, Denmark, Netherlands, and the UK. Of course, this could expand. I don't know what's the matter with this. There we go. When it comes to the challenges we had in putting this together, they're really quite considerable because of all these differences I've been talking about. And one of our overarching aims really is to provide a solution for regulators to say, listen, here's a tool that we've already developed, and it can be changed, and it can be adapted to take on other things, such as a pan-European criteria. And for example, the Danish industry agreement is based on the SBP approach. But the lack of confirmed standards at EU and national level has been very, very difficult for us. So the scope of certification, essentially, it's a feedstock to power plant scheme, but it doesn't operate at the forest level. The key concepts are, in summary, that we make maximum use of FSC and PFC, as I say, complement where necessary, and we address these specific biomass issues. But it can be used in areas with limited uptake of FSC or PFC, because we adopt a risk-based approach for non-certified feedstock, and this is a key element of the SBP scheme. Peter is going to tell us in a few minutes about how he's been working on actually applying this risk-based approach, so I won't go into it in too much detail, but essentially, with a risk-based approach, what we have is that the biomass producer who has a PFC or FSC certificate immediately moves into compliance, so they don't have to go through this phase. If they don't have a PFC or FSC certificate, then they have to undertake the supply-based evaluation, which is essentially to look at the risks, define the risks, and determine if there are risks specified, what mitigation processes have to be put in place. So it's the biomass producer, the pellet mill typically, that has to undertake this work, and obviously that is not straightforward. For that reason, we've started to develop some regional risk assessments, which will take a lot of that burden off the individual biomass producers. So just last week we put draft regional risk assessments for the 3 Baltic states on our website, asking for comments on those. There's 6 standards available. You can look at them all on the website. This slide just tries to show you a visualization of those. So the pellet mill has to define its feedstock, its catchment area, undertake the evaluation, and obviously we have standards for energy and carbon data collection, chain of custody, but we use an FSC or PFC chain of custody, we don't have our own, and the calculation of the carbon balance according to regulatory requirements in the final country where the material is actually burned. So a review of the development milestones. Work started in summer 2013. We produced draft standards for stakeholder consultation in March 2014. We produced a version 0, a beta standard, if you like, for testing in September 2014, and then we launched our version 1 standards in March of this year at an event to the EC in Brussels. So the NEPCON is our first SBP approved certification body, and this morning we've also announced that NSF has become our second certification body to be approved. We've got about 30 pipe audits of biomass producers in the pipeline. We anticipate the first certificates will be issued this week, and we anticipate one will be in the US and one will be here in Europe. So we are on a bit of a roll. It's been very, very rapid progress in certification terms. To do this in just over 2 years is quite extraordinary, but we're now moving from the concept to the implementation stage, and so far so good. We haven't come across any major glitches, and we've got real momentum. So going forward, some further refinement and strengthening. We've got an advisory board in place, as I say, and as we move forward, we plan to develop a version 2, timing not yet decided, but it'll be very important to include a greater a wider group of stakeholders in that process. So thank you for listening. Sorry it's a bit rushed. It's a very complicated business, but thank you very much for your attention.